Snow drifted sideways across the Wyoming plains, soft as ash from an old world burning out. The land stretched white and endless, its silence deep enough to hold every sorrow a person ever carried. Through that silence came a woman, 20 years old, wrapped in a frayed shawl and a lifetime of rejection. Clara Wynne, half native and half settler, trudged through the wind toward the faint outline of a ranch house, her boots sinking with each step. Her breath came in ghost. She had nowhere left to go, and yet something, pride, hunger, maybe a stubborn faith, kept her walking. The storm thickened until the house ahead blurred to shadow. She lifted her hand to knock, but hesitated, as if the wood itself might judge her for daring to hope. Still she knocked. The door opened with a sigh. Harlan Boone, 30, stood framed by lamplight, a giant of a man with shoulders built from years of fence posts and loss. His face was carved by wind and scar, but his eyes held a gentleness he'd never learned to use. He looked at the trembling girl, at her torn shawl, her blue-tinted lips. She lowered her gaze and whispered through the shiver in her throat, "I ain't perfect, but let me stay and work." For a long breath he said nothing. Snow rattled against the porch rail, impatient for his answer. He could have sent her away. He'd sent many away before. But something in her voice sounded like his own loneliness given shape. He stepped aside. "You can stay," he said. That single mercy changed the temperature of the room. The fire cracked. The storm's howl softened. Clara stood by the door, unsure whether to remove her boots, her shame, or both. He told her there was hay to move come morning, chores enough to earn her keep. She nodded, grateful but guarded. As he turned back to the fire, she caught a glimpse of a picture above the mantel, a faded photograph of a woman and child long gone. She wondered what story that silence carried, but she did not ask. Not yet. At dawn, the world glowed silver. Clara rose early, sleeves rolled past her elbows, and began mending fences. Her hands bled by noon, yet she did not stop. Harlan watched from a distance, pretending to check the horses, but truth be told, he was studying her rhythm, the quiet persistence of someone who'd learned to survive without applause. The other ranch hands muttered when they passed. "Boone's gone soft," one said. "A half-blood girl on his land'll curse us all." The words slid through the wind like knives, but Harlan said nothing. Clara heard them too. She simply bent her head lower, her hum thin and steady, the sound of a woman refusing to break. Evenings were colder inside the house than outside. They shared supper in silence, each lost in thoughts that didn't know how to speak. He'd pour her coffee, she'd thank him without meeting his eyes, and something fragile would hang between them, unspoken but alive. The wind against the windows became their companion, and the fire their witness. He sometimes caught himself wondering who she'd been before this, what laughter sounded like in her voice, what kindness had once touched her. But curiosity was a dangerous thing in a lonely man. He held it close, where it could not betray him. Days blurred into one another. Snow kept falling, and so did gossip. When Harlan rode into town for supplies, conversation stopped cold. Sheriff Corman leaned against the saloon post and said, "You keep that girl out there, Boone, you'll lose your name." Harlan met his stare. "I already lost it," he said quietly. "Just didn't notice till now." The sheriff's smirk faltered, but he said no more. As Harlan rode home through the pale dusk, snow gathered on his hat brim and beard, and something fierce grew in his chest. Not anger, exactly, but a vow. That night, he found Clara outside, splitting kindling in the glow of the barn lantern. Her breath hung silver in the air. "You should be resting," he said. "I don't rest easy," she answered. Her tone carried no defiance, only fact. He took the axe from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. She flinched from the warmth of it, startled by the pulse that jumped between them. He split the wood in silence. She watched him, wondering what kind of man risked his standing for a stranger. She wanted to ask why, but questions were a luxury for people who felt safe. She wasn't there yet. Winter thickened. One morning she didn't come in from the corral. Harlan found her half-collapsed near the fence, skin pale, breath shallow. He lifted her easily and carried her into the house, laying her by the fire. Her body shook beneath the blanket as fever took her. All night he sat beside her, changing cool cloths, feeding her sips of water. Once, through her delirium, she murmured, "Don't send me away." The words pierced something old in him, something that had been frozen too long. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. "You're home," he said. She didn't hear him, but the fire did. It burned brighter for both of them. When morning came, she woke to find him gone and a plate of bread and coffee waiting. For the first time in years, she smiled without meaning to. Outside, the snow eased, and sunlight struck the hills like forgiveness. Yet peace was a fragile visitor. By week's end, someone had thrown a rock through the ranch window. The note tied to it read, "Send her back to her kind." Harlan picked it up, jaw tightening. Clara watched him, fear crawling up her spine. "They'll come for me," she whispered. He shook his head. "They'll have to come through me first." His voice was quiet, steady. But his eyes held a storm that no sheriff could calm. The following night, he found her packing her few belongings: 2 shirts, a comb, a small pouch of beads. "You were right," she said softly. "I bring trouble." He took a step closer, snow still clinging to his coat. "You're the first thing this land's given me worth keeping." Her breath caught. Outside, the wind fell still, as if the world leaned in to listen. He removed his hat, the gesture slow, reverent. "If you stay, it's your choice. But don't leave because they can't see what I see." The words lingered in the air between them, warm despite the cold. She didn't answer. She simply placed the pouch on the table and sat by the fire. That was her answer. The next morning, riders approached, Sheriff Corman and 3 townsmen. Their horses' hooves broke the crusted snow like thunder. Clara watched from the porch, her hand pressed to the doorframe. The sheriff dismounted. "Boone," he called, "you're harborin' a thief and a sinner. Hand her over, and we'll forget the rest." Harlan walked out slow, unarmed but unyielding. "You know that's a lie," he said. "You just don't like what she is." The sheriff's hand drifted toward his gun. The air went thin. Then Harlan spoke again, voice low enough to shake the silence. "If you're here for her, you'll go through me." Snow began to fall, erasing their footprints even as they made them. The sheriff looked into Harlan's eyes and found no give there. After a long pause, he swung back onto his horse. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "Maybe," Harlan said. "But not today." When they rode off, Clara stepped beside him. "They'll be back," she whispered. He looked at her, a faint smile cutting through the tension. "Then we'll still be here." That night they sat near the hearth, not speaking. Words felt too small for the courage it took to stay. The storm outside roared again, but within the house, there was only the quiet rhythm of 2 hearts thawing. Weeks passed. The town's fury burned itself out. There are only so many stones a heart can throw before it tires. The preacher's wife began leaving bread at their gate, though she never said a word about it. When spring hinted faintly through the frost, Harlan saddled his horse and asked Clara to ride with him. She didn't know where they were going until she saw the little chapel by the frozen creek. Inside waited the preacher and his wife, both looking uneasy but kind. Clara's hands trembled. "You don't have to," she murmured. Harlan smiled, small and true. "I know. That's why I want to." The ceremony was short. She wore a dress stitched from old curtains. He wore his father's vest, mended at the seams. When the preacher spoke the vows, Harlan's voice was steady, hers barely above a whisper. Yet when he placed the simple ring on her finger, something in the air changed, as though the land itself took a breath. The preacher said, "What God joins in snow, no man can melt." Outside, flakes drifted from a bright sky, soft and slow, blessing the moment with silence. They rode home together, the horizon stretching endless and clean. For the first time, Clara felt the land belonged to her, not through blood or law, but through love earned in defiance of both. At the ranch gate, she looked back at the chapel's distant steeple and said, "Do you think they'll ever forgive us?" Harlan's smile carried years of dust and tenderness. "Let 'em try," he said. The horses snorted, clouds of breath curling like smoke. Years later, an old ranch hand named Joe Pickens, the one who'd watched it all, would tell their story to anyone who'd listen. He'd sit by the fire in the general store, voice rough with age, and say, "Snow was thick that winter, thicker than I ever saw again. But I swear it melted a little faster round those two." Folks would lean closer, drawn by something they couldn't name. He'd smile, gaze far off. Town folks forgot their names after a while, but out by Dust Hollow, the grass grows greener where they used to walk. Maybe that's what love does, it leaves the ground kinder than it found it. And when the telling was done, he'd always end the same way, turning his eyes toward the drifting snow outside the window. "If you ever find someone whose broken edges fit your own," he'd murmur, "don't wait for the world to nod. Snow melts, tongues quiet, but kindness stays." The wind would move softly through the doorway then, like it knew their names still, carrying a trace of wood smoke and memory. And though the night stretched on, no one spoke for a long while, because everyone there felt it, the warmth left behind by a love that once refused to freeze.